Hello and welcome everyone. In this video I'm going to talk about more reverb processing tricks. I want you to listen very closely to the drums now, especially to the reverb of the drums as I'm turning on and off this chain. You have probably noticed that whenever this is enabled, I get a very smooth sound where especially the body of the drums gets a little bit more reverberated, while when it's turned off, you can hear the sound much more on the transients. And if you looked at the meter on the master as well, then you noticed that it's actually clipping whenever I have this turned off. So having it turned on does not only sound better, it is also better for the headroom of the entire mix. Now you might be wondering, what is this even, you know? And that's what I want to break down for you now. This is a Reverb Send track. So it starts by audio receiving the overheads group, which on its own just sound like this. The overheads group just has a bunch of different overhead mics and the room mic in it. So it's kind of the combination of what makes the drum sound a bit more roomy. And that's also going to this track. Then there is a convolution reverb that just has a very short room reverb on it. I can mute the track and then play it back again so that you can hear the difference between this track being enabled and disabled in general. Of course, it's just way too loud now, and I would also usually post-process the sound of the reverb a little bit before I'm trying to mix it with the rest of the music, but it's just to exaggerate the effect here so that you can hear better what's going on YouTube. Now you already know the basics, that this is a send and that this uses a convolution reverb, but that's not the interesting part of it, because you could use the same technique that I'm going to show you with all the other reverbs that you have and like already. So first of all, let's talk about this tool thing. In Bitwig, a tool is sort of a plugin that has just these parameters, for example, a volume slider. And there is an audio rate modulator that you can attach to the volume slider so that it ducks the volume whenever something happens. Now you can see the modulation signal going on here, but I think it's not a very nice way to visualize that. So I go to this track and actually show you what the signal really looks like. So you already know the basics of the trick that I'm currently showing you, which is that the input signal on the reverb send is being compressed before actually going into the reverb, so that the transients are out of the way. And if you don't use Bitwig and don't have this whole tool infrastructure with audio rate modulators and stuff, then you could also get a similar effect by just taking Pro C2, you know, making some settings with very short attack, a bit more release, and of course dialing in some Lookahead so that it eats the transient, and that would be pretty much it. But I decided to go the longer route because I really wanted to customize the shape of this, because it can sound very different depending on what exactly you are doing. Okay, so that's why I want to show you what's going on this track. So the kick snare mod track is also sort of a send, just like the drums reverb send, but this is a very specific send that I would say is specific to programs like Bitwig that have a modulation system. You can see what makes this specific already by seeing that the fader is being turned down to -infinity, so basically muted, but not really, because I want it to be processed. But this just shows that this track's output is not being meant as an audio signal but as a modulation signal. Apart from that, it's pretty similar to what you would do on a send. You start with an audio receiver, but this time it's two audio receivers in an FX layer so that they can run in parallel, and one of them gets the pre-fader from the kick. You know, the pre-fader. If you are using post-fader, then you have the problem that you always have to play the source tracks while playing back the music in order for this to be processed at all, and that's not cool. I want to be able to just hit solo on the reverb send and only hear the reverb. and for that you just have to use pre-fader on everything. So always choose pre-fader for these kind of things. Okay, so the next thing that you have to do is set up an audio sidechain modulator, or if you don't need the filters, you could also just use an envelope follower, and then it is attached to the DC offset of the output signal. If we disable the other two effects, this would look like this. So as you can see, that already goes into the right direction, but it's kind of a very nervous signal, and it's not the best to have a modulator be that nervous on the hits that you want to use for docking. So the next step is to just smoothen this signal. Now this already looks pretty much like the thing that you want to have. Let's listen to the reverb signal on its own. And you can hear little blips of the transient cutting through, and that's why we will introduce our own custom Lookahead thing now by just using the time shift thing in Bitwig to put this back minus around 20 milliseconds, and then the reverb sounds like this. And this is exactly the part of everything where you really get it to not interfere with the headroom of the mix. And yeah, and then you just have this overall sound. Now you could just try different things, like that's why I wrapped the tool around a chain so that I can use the mix parameter in order to mix this transient compensated thing with the normal thing. Maybe I want to have a sound that is somewhere in between these two. Let's check that out. Because it does sound a little bit cool when the kick and the snare has a bit of impact on the reverb. It's just not that it should be so much. So it's cool that we have control here for how much ducking we want it to apply. Now I know that the people who visit my videos are always curious about all the alternative methods as well. So let's just deactivate this and instead try to do the same thing by just, using Proceed, just like I said earlier. Let's go. Nice, it worked very well as well. So you can use the technique in this way, in this very easy way, just as much as with my complex ways. And now let's try the same thing with Spiff, because now you can also of course do that with the transient shaper. If the transient shaper has a mode that lets you reduce transients instead of enhancing them. And Spiff has that, so let's go. Spiff's take on this technique is also very transparent. Now let's also try while we added kilohertz transient shaper. Yeah, that sounds pretty cool too, but I could hear a little bit of a blip. So I guess there is some internal look ahead going on, or maybe this thing is just super fast, I don't know, but it doesn't remove the transient completely. So that's definitely not a choice that I want to consider, because I do want the fully wet signal to just eat the transient completely, and just the way I'm using dry wet to get the normal signal back should be the thing that gets the transient back into the game. But I don't want to hear any blips on the wet signal. So now I just have to decide which of these approaches I like most, or make a mix between all of them. But that's something that we'll do privately after having made this video.